Despite all the focus this week, obviously, on the 2020 elections, there's also been a shocking lack of focus when it comes to securing that election and protecting it from foreign meddling. Mitch McConnell, he continues to block bills that would better safeguard our voting process, even after we got this warning from Robert Mueller just last week.
In your investigation, did you think that this was a single attempt by the Russians to get involved in our election, or did you find evidence to suggest they'll try to do this again?
No, it wasn't a single attempt. They're doing it as we sit here, and they expect to do it during the next campaign.
Now, if that wasn't enough, President Trump continues to decimate our intelligence agencies. He seems to have picked his new nominee for Director of National Intelligence, Congressman John Ratcliffe. It seems Ratcliffe's best qualifications is that he is a loyalist and appears to do or willing to do Trump's bidding. Certainly, though, it cannot be for qualifications. Ratcliffe, he has none outside of his seat on the House Intel Committee. It's a role he's had for just 4 years. He's also padded his resume with now false claims of prosecuting terrorist suspects. If confirmed, Ratcliffe, he would replace Dan Coats, who, as one of Trump's so-called adults in the room, had a rocky relationship, to say the least, with the president. His resignation, it prompted this story in Slate. Dan Coats lost his job for telling Trump the truth. The president wants intelligence that will hurt his enemies, not challenge his opinions. For more, let's turn now to Susan Greenhalgh. Susan's the Vice President of Policy and Programs at the National Election Defense Coalition. Susan, thanks for a few.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I think for a lot of folks, by now they've obviously heard that the Russians interfered in our election. And I think for some, they hear the word bots, or they hear, 12 guys in a room here with nothing better to do, sending out misleading stories. But as best as you can, put the scope of just how coordinated, even sophisticated, and effective this interference was and is as we speak today.
So what's really important to note is that the Russian interference extended well beyond the social media campaigns and the hacking of DNC emails that we hear very frequently about. And what we learned, not just from the Mueller report, but also from the Senate Intelligence Committee report that was released last week, is that there was a extended systemic effort to break into the election systems and county and state boards of elections across the country, as well as voting system vendors. And the report revealed that not only were they successful in a couple of attempts, but they expected that it was across all 50 states, and that they actually succeeded in getting into a voting system vendor. They also note that there's no evidence that vote totals were changed, but the report also very importantly notes that the intelligence community has extraordinarily limited visibility into the state and local election systems. So it's a case of you can only see what you can see.
Again, Susan, to try and drive this point home, people may have heard about the social media campaigns, obviously Russians picking favorite candidates, working to further that candidate's chances and also attack his opponent in the process. We know that they were effective in many cases, shaping narratives, more often false than not, about a candidate. But while they can't necessarily impact your or my vote when we go into the booth because there's not that connectivity, they have not only attempted, but you're saying they've succeeded and certainly have the impetus to do it in 2020, to actually go into the actual election management systems, whether they be on a state level or even local level, and possibly even change vote tallies.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what's very worrying, and that is absolutely a possibility because we're talking about a very committed, determined, skilled, and competent adversary. I just want to clarify that we are told often that voting machines themselves are not connected to the internet. And by and large, that is the case, but that doesn't mean that they are so far removed from the internet that remote hacking is impossible. We know that there are many states that use wireless modems within their voting systems to transmit election results. Those wireless modems connect to the internet and expose those systems to internet-based attacks. Furthermore, there are election management systems, as you mentioned, which program those individual voting machines. And very often those are either connected directly to the internet or interface in some point with other systems that are connected to the internet. So we have that problem. In addition, we have another problem, which is that the voter registration databases create a very attractive target for somebody that's intent on creating chaos or disrupting an election or potentially trying to favor one candidate. Because if an adversary attacks our voter registration database and begins to selectively change people's voter registration record, meaning I show up to vote, and rather than having my name correctly or having my address correctly, it's different, and now I'm not permitted to vote. I have to, on a regular ballot, I have to cast a provisional ballot, or I'm told I need to go across town and vote at another location. This is going to impact the way people are voting on election day. It can create chaos and disruption if the goal is simply to delegitimize the process, or it could also selectively disenfranchise voters that are likely to vote for one candidate or the other.
We could be looking at a hot mess next November. Okay, so if we've established that the problem is very real and possibly even much more significant next election than even the previous one, then the question is, well, what can we do about it, both the will and the way? I mentioned right off the top that the intelligence community certainly has been at odds with the president, but now with Dan Coats leaving and Ratcliffe coming in, shouldn't people be rightfully concerned that the people on the front lines in the intelligence community that will say these foreign actors are A, not our friends, but they're actively trying to adversely impact our nation, those messages may not be delivered loud and clear?
Absolutely. I think the intelligence community has always been a very nonpartisan community or entity, and it's been able to kind of just focus on the facts, focus on the threat, focus on how best to protect our nation. If we begin politicizing that, we're going down a very dangerous road, which we can't afford to go down, especially while we're facing this threat right now to our elections, to the very foundation, to our democracy, and to the legitimacy of our government. So that's very troubling.
In terms of the vote, I couldn't believe maybe, there was issues that McConnell handled with it, but the idea that we couldn't get behind in a bipartisan way, an idea to protect a free and fair election, that's almost as scary as some of the stuff I hear from the administration. I never thought, actually counting votes fairly in the U.S. was a partisan affair, but apparently I was naive.
Unfortunately, we're seeing what should be very simple, basic election security measures, which are paper ballots and then mandatory routine audits of those election results conducted with the paper ballot before an election certified. Those very fundamental common sense precautions and protections should be no-brainers to get adopted across the country. But we're finding that we really need to have federal government set those minimum standards because the states are not responding quickly enough to adopt those reforms. So this is where the federal government can really come in and just set those minimum standards. Election audits, paper ballots, those shouldn't benefit one party or the other. That's just making sure that everybody's vote is counted on a durable physical record, and that the election count is checked afterwards.
Susan Greenhalgh, great job. I appreciate the time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.